Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second panel in a series of panels on women in entrepreneurship and knowledge. My name is Lori Turnbull, and I'm going to host the panel for you today. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that Dalhousie is located on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. We are all treaty people. So today, I'm really excited to welcome three guests to talk to you about women in innovation. So overall, the point of these panels is to bring together some really thoughtful people and talk about some of the pressing issues around women's engagement in innovation and entrepreneurship. So today we're going to focus specifically on what government's role is and what it can be in encouraging and supporting women who work in the area of innovation. So I'm going to tell you about our three guests, or actually I'm going to welcome them to tell you about them. So I'm going to start by welcoming Christine Gowdy, and she is going to tell you a little bit about herself and how she's coming at this conversation today.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Christine Gowdy. I'm co-founder and CEO of Granville Biomedical. We design women's health anatomical simulation models that enhance healthcare training and advance patient education. Last year, when COVID struck, we decided to utilize our 3D printing skills to create a novel nasopharyngeal swab for COVID testing. We plan to circle back 360 to women's health by creating a novel pelvic exam swab this year. So it's been a pretty interesting journey for me, and I look forward to contributing to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Christine. We're so happy that you're here. Next, I'm going to introduce Catherine Blewett to come forward virtually and say a few words.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Blewett, and I'm the Chief Strategic Engagement Officer with the Ocean Frontier Institute. I will tell you, in previous roles that I've had, both provincially and federally, I've had a number of sort of successively senior roles in government. So we'll be really happy to share my reflections on what government can't do. So it'll be an interesting conversation, and thanks for including me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And exactly, like you're coming at this from a really interesting perspective, Catherine, having been in those roles. And finally, I'm going to invite Christine Gibbons to come forward and tell us a little bit about herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Gibbons, and I'm the Executive Director of Strategic Policy and Innovation with Nova Scotia's brand new Office of Equity and Anti-Racism Initiatives. And I'm very excited for this conversation. I love talking about government, like what Catherine just said, what government can do and what we don't do so well, where others, should be in that space. So, looking forward to this.
Thank you so much to Christine and to everyone. I'm so interested in hearing more about that new office. I think, this is obviously a very new thing for Nova Scotia and a really, really important thing. So anytime you want to weave that into today's conversation would be absolutely great. I'm going to come to Christine Gowdy for the first question, and then come to the other panels with the same question, but I'll start with Christine. So we know that the economic disruptions of COVID-19 have been particularly challenging for women, to the point where we risk undoing much of the progress that has been made for women's prosperity. Can you give us a sense of your thoughts on this and what your concerns are as we look toward economic recovery?
I think it's pretty interesting, the space we're in right now. I think that it's always been challenging for female founders to raise venture capital, for example. I think COVID made it even more challenging for us. There was just less investment to be had. I do think that there's been a little bit of a change in that, though, with some pop-up ventures coming for female founders, female-specific funding groups, VCs in particular, that are popping up, seeking female founders to fund. So I love that that's happening and really emerged during COVID as well. I also think that investors wanting to diversify their portfolio by really looking at diversity and inclusion there's been a strong emphasis on that. So I'm seeing that as well. So I feel like there's some positive things happening in this space, but I still feel like it's been very challenging for us in terms of raising capital. And I'd love to see that change. I'm not sure what you guys think about that, but that's kind of where I'm at this point.
Yeah. Catherine, can I come to you next?
Yeah, sure. And look, it's been interesting reflecting back on the last 14, 15, 16 months. And, for sure, when you think about women in the workplace, like nearly 40%, but well over 50% of the job losses actually impacted women. I kind of have this, I've called COVID a bit of, for women, there's the back line and the front line. So the back line have been those women who've lost their jobs, accommodation, food services, retail trade, arts, tourism, like those are the jobs that fell away overnight, and the impact that had on women. And then you move forward to the front line in education and in healthcare. Those women, weren't impacted from losing their job perspective, but their jobs fundamentally changed. And so the impact on their mental health, their capacity to deliver, and frankly, in the healthcare context, being called on to actually over-deliver. So huge backline, frontline pressures on women. So when I think about, coming out of this, and I was at the Privy Council office when literally one day to the next, we moved to close down the Canadian economy. Everything went virtual overnight. So what we've seen, and Christine made a good point, like we've seen innovation, we've seen flexibility, we've seen enormous creativity. So what I would hope for in the recovery, in the economic pivot back, is that same flexibility. We've all proven in every sector, in every jurisdiction that we can do it. So looking for that flexibility is going to be super, super important. We can totally do it. And I don't want us to fall back on the same old paradigms. We've learned a lot.
Yeah, that is a really important point. Christine Gibbons.
I think, I love the distinction that Catherine just made in terms of the front line and the back line. It's a really interesting way to articulate that, and is incredibly on point. And what I've noticed is we do know that women do more in the home and outside the home just in regular times. But what we've seen is the pandemic has exacerbated those traditional roles. So women were doing even more childcare, even more household chores, elder care for taking care of parents and things like that. And then for some, you added on virtual schooling and loss of income and tension between spouses and things like that. So it will be really interesting as we emerge out of this pandemic and think about, I would like to see us thinking about it very differently than we have typically thought about it. And that there is an appetite for, bringing people together that traditionally aren't part of conversations within government about what to do, and just different ways of solving problems than we've tackled in the past.
Yeah, I love those points. And I think sort of trying to draw on what everyone has said here, it strikes me that now that we're coming to a point where the vaccination rate is going up, the COVID infection rate is going down, we're getting to a point where we can really meaningfully start talking about, not that we haven't been meaningfully talking about it, but we're really kind of on the verge of what is recovery going to look like. It strikes me that it's a really interesting time for the role of government. And there's a lot of expectations on governments to do things differently, talk about things differently, recognize things that we haven't been recognizing as much in the past. So it strikes me that, the role of the state issue is going to be huge. So on that, the most recent federal budget, and Catherine, I'll come to you on this one first. The most recent federal budget promised to create a national daycare strategy. How important do you think this is for women in the economy?
Well, I think it's enormously important, and it's pretty interesting that a national daycare program has been something that's been, in the atmosphere for decades. And it's pretty interesting in this economic context. It was a social imperative that flipped to become an economic imperative. And it truly is critical. When I reflect on the economic choices that women have to make, for those who have children, it's going to be so important. From a human capital perspective, we need everybody in the workforce. When you think about just the demographics, and we could have economists engaged on this forever. What's happening across the labor market, we need to bring everybody into the labor market. And the gains that women have made particularly, I think the figures show that given the burden of childcare throughout the pandemic, we've really lost virtually all of those gains. So it's important, absolutely, and it'd be interesting to see the choices that women make, and that's maybe something we can pick up on in a minute.
Yep. Thank you. Christine Gowdy, can I come to you?
Sure. I don't have children, so it didn't impact me in the same ways it did a lot of my friends and family, but I did witness that the pandemic proved that the flexibility given to a lot of employees to work from home was effective as well, and that alleviated a lot of childcare issues for some of my friends that I've witnessed. I like that. I like that there's more trust building in workplaces and that you can trust people to work from home. You can set them up to work from home long term with proven productivity. We've always worked remotely within my company, and we've always enjoyed that. So when the pandemic struck, it wasn't that unusual for all of us to still be at home. But I like the flexibility that some of the large corporations are now seeing and providing for their staff. I think it alleviated a lot of anxiety for people as well as they dealt with the childcare issues. All I know is that I have a fur child, and she's living her best life these days, my dog, and just enjoying me being home all the time so much. But I really encourage government to really help companies keep that flexibility, provide childcare in office or in co-working spaces as well. That's something that's kind of overlooked quite often. And I have been part of some really great co-working spaces, and to see childcare now being introduced into some of those is really important as well.
Yeah, for sure. And Christine Gibbons, please.
Yeah, so I think for me, this, when I heard about this in the budget, what struck me was, so my children are getting older now. I have 3 and the youngest is 11. I can honestly say sometimes I forget what it was like to have little kids and how much that impacted my career. And so, and I have lots of friends who have little ones. So it's remembering. So, because what I found was, and a lot of women are incredibly, they advance a lot when they're younger. And then they kind of, sidestep a little bit while they're having kids, if they have kids. And then you kind of pick back up and kind of go from there. And if you're lucky, and depending on the environment. But I think it's really important for women like me to remember what it's like and to lift those women up and to be constantly thinking what they need in any type of policy discussions that we're having in terms of programming, things like that. That was the biggest thing that struck me about that. Because I was thinking, oh, really, daycare? And I thought, oh, obviously daycare. So yeah, it was it was a good reminder for me.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So I've made the tactical mistake of coming to you last twice, Christine. So now I'm going to come to you first to try to bring it all full circle. So just sort of on the basis of that too, like if we can keep, if we want to branch out, but if we want to keep thinking along this line, what are some of the barriers for women who want to work in the area of innovation in particular?
So I think, if I high level, I think 3 of the key barriers are access to time. So free time where you can actually think and do other than sort of the tasks that you have on hand. Access to education and access to financing, which Christine spoke about. And I think there are so many barriers within each of those pieces that can make it really, really challenging for women in our society. But those are the 3 where I think we need to be exploring each of those areas and thinking with women what barriers there are to each of those and how we need to address those.
Yeah, I wrote that down. That's excellent. I'm going to keep that in mind. Catherine, what do you think?
Well, look, having, how to ensure that women are able to be more engaged in innovation. It's actually, for me, it's a national productivity issue, right? Canada and many nations have not fully ensured that women come into the innovation sector. When you think about STEM, you think about many of the backgrounds. Right now, many tech companies, have very limited, if any, women in senior executive or management positions. So, the diversity that you see reflects the kind of outcomes you get. So I think Christine Gowdy touched on some of the solution space, and I'd love to get to that discussion because it is, and Christine Gibbons as well, access to capital, access to resources, and frankly, that's all that's required. It's been interesting how tilted the playing field has been without a realization that that's been the case. So it's an important way forward, and I do think there are areas that government can actually make a tangible difference. So maybe we'll come to that.
Yes. And Christine Gowdy, please, before we do turn over to that question.
Yeah, I have so much to say in this area. I feel like one thing that's so pivotal but not talked about enough is visibility. I feel like we need more people, more women, more diverse founders, diverse C-suite professionals, as Catherine mentioned as well. And there's just not enough of that, especially in Canada. It's so hard to see what you want to become. And it's hard to be encouraged that that's an opportunity that you can do as well. I think funding, like we chatted about, is definitely problematic, but there's been some great movement there too. I know in Newfoundland, that's where we founded our company. There's TechNL, and they really encourage, now they have a high school program to create high school internships. So they're starting at a younger level, trying to get women engaged in the tech sector, create that visibility, create role models. And I also feel like there's a huge gap where we need to create more female founder roundtables and invite in women or diverse communities who want to discover what it's like to be a CEO or be a C-suite individual, or even just, work within a tech company. And what does that look like? There's so many different roles in tech and innovation, and sometimes people generalize tech and innovation as something that's just programming and just over their head. There's so many positions that are from everything from administration to HR to so many other roles that I think there's just more conversations that need to be had around it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to come to Catherine with this first and get your thoughts on, given everything we've talked about. We've talked a bit so far about some of the things that government can do, but if we really want to focus on some of the barriers that we've talked about here and the goals that we have and the objectives that we have. Again, I really think that government's role in moving social progress, in decades has perhaps never been so profound as it is now. And so, Catherine, in your mind, what can government do to support women in innovation and to make it more possible for women to do this work?
Yeah. And look, thank you for the question, and it's the most important one. And let's just park money for a minute, because in every government role I've had, that's been the first part of the conversation, but just park money for a second. The other thing that governments can actively do is look at who they engage with based on, let's say, the composition of their company. What does their board look like? What kind of representation is on their board? Is it diverse? Is there gender equity on boards? That's not a small piece. And, before you get in the door, perhaps you have to prove your bona fides from a corporate perspective. I think that's very important. So structure matters. HR practices matter a lot. When I think about how, and this actually very much also addresses diversity, how governments even can bring people in. HR practices like not identifying the names or the sex and just having resumes go through based on qualifications and experience. It's amazing the bias that is built into some systems. So structure matters a lot. The other thing, government's role in training, reskilling, and actually the digital platforms that exist. Those are things government is doing anyway. And when I think about the digital era to come and the increasing influence, including more women in the formulation, I think about AI. What we've seen about this pandemic is that machine learning is actually going to start to take different jobs and take different forms. There's incredible bias actually built in. to many AI platforms, and having diversity and including women in the formulation of programming is really important. So then we'll get to money. So structure matters, but the resources do as well. There have been some good steps, not enough yet, but in terms of actually focused funding for female venture capital, it's in drops though, compared to what's out there generally. And what I worry about a little bit is that it gets pushed into a bit of a niche and almost into a ghetto. And oh, well, that's female venture funding, but then there's everything else. So that's a balance about making specialized funds available, because why can't women and women-backed ventures compete all across the board? So again, I think structure is as important as funding in some instances, because government interacts with structures, and we do it in a prescribed way. Stepping back from that and actually changing structures will make a difference, I think.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to chew on there. Christine Gibbons, please.
So I looked at this question in terms of the work that we're currently doing with the new Office of Equity and Anti-Racism, and because I'm especially attuned to the fact that the biggest impact of the pandemic and just the biggest impact on our economy is on marginalized women. So it's just takes women and then to another level of challenge. And what we're doing in the office is looking at government policy, so legislation, regulations, and pulling in partners with firsthand perspective and lived experience to review those and so we can have conversations. And what we're discovering is such well-intentioned policies and programs that they think they're just trying to be very objective and they can apply to everybody are completely missing the boat when it comes to marginalized populations. Not that that's surprising, but it's just using the processes that we're using and pulling in partners with the understanding that government can't solve a lot of these issues on its own. We need partners at the table, and we need to come as a partner. We can't come as the traditional way that government comes to the table. So those are the things that I'm thinking, like that we can change the way that we work and who we work with.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. And I've been thinking too about the importance of gathering that, people's stories, people's experiences, because sometimes I worry that we're getting to the point where we're so focused on data and quantitative data and measuring things that sometimes you miss it if you're not getting the story, and then you really understand, okay, this is how this is affecting people, and maybe we're not measuring things right. I was at a panel last week where one of the panelists made a point that there is no such thing as raw data. Every collection instrument has bias. Every approach has bias in it, and so we need to be constantly correcting and yeah. Christine Gowdy, please.
I think it hasn't started at the federal level, and I feel like they're starting that now. I'm just noticing with some application processes, they've implemented the question, what is your diversity and inclusion plan? And so I want to see more of that. I want that to be mandatory. I want companies applying to be able to prove that they have a diverse company and diverse founders or whatever that looks like. So I think that would immediately start to level out the playing field a little bit in terms of funding. And provincially as well, I feel like I do feel though at the provincial level they do look for more of that. They're very dialed into that. But the federal level just feels so much more anonymous, and I didn't see much of that, those requests coming through as we were applying for funding. So we were just applying, alongside so many other male counterparts, and it's hard to know where we line up when that's the case. But I do see that starting to be one of the questions in the application. So just more of that. And programs that are specifically for diverse founders. I know that's just so cliche, but we just need more of it. We need more. We need it to be at the federal level, definitely.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's emerged that I'm not sure if anyone's actually used this word yet, but I think we're talking about accountability and holding each other to account for doing better and making sure that we all understand that as as Catherine said, like this is a national prosperity issue. We all have a stake in this, and we're all responsible for it. And so, yeah, I think there's, you know, a whole lot that we're hopefully on the verge of doing and starting to do now. Thank you so much to Catherine and Christine. This has been great. This has been, you know, so substantive and impactful. And let me thank you on behalf of everyone who's listening to, you know, for everything that you've given us today to think about. I think we've had a really great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.